If you think the world is just a little chaotic right now, you aren't paying attention to the echoes of history. Just recently, legendary investor and former head of the world's largest hedge fund, Ray Dalio, dropped a massive memo. The title? One sentence. But it's enough to send chills down Wall Street's spine. 2026 is exactly like 1936. This isn't doom scrolling. It's history, 90 years later, whispering a terrifyingly heavy warning. Let's rewind the clock. 1936. Summer in Berlin. The Olympics are a hyper-choreographed display of prosperity and order by Nazi Germany. Back home, people are listening to jazz on the radio, obsessing over King Edward VIII giving up the throne for love. On paper, the shadows of the Great Depression seem to be lifting. High society is partying. But in the dark, where nobody is looking, the spring is wound to its absolute breaking point. That same year, ignoring all his generals, Hitler gambles. He marches troops into the Rhineland, a strictly forbidden red zone under the Treaty of Versailles. The response from Britain and France? Silence. Retreat. Paralyzed by their own domestic economic disasters. Dalio points out, this appeasement wasn't born of mercy. It happened because the old world order was rotting from the inside out. Does 2026 feel exactly like that eve of destruction? Just recently, at the Munich Security Conference, the German Chancellor gave a public autopsy to the globe. He declared, point blank, that the world order of the last few decades no longer exists. This wasn't a standard diplomatic summit. It was a funeral for the post-1945 era. The official theme of the report? Unraveling. Welcome to the era of wrecking ball politics. Nobody wants to patch the roof anymore. They just want to demolish the house. Dalio argues that right now, in 2026, we are standing at the violent collision of three massive macroeconomic cycles. 3 volcanoes, and every single one is ready to blow. Volcano number 1, the debt limit. It is hard to wrap your head around, but by the end of 2026, the US is projected to burn through $1 trillion just on debt interest. That's not just a number on a balance sheet. It means our wealth is entirely maxed out. In 1936, the Fed tightened monetary policy to fight inflation and triggered the catastrophic Roosevelt recession of '37. Today's math is identical. When the rate of debt growth outpaces income growth for this long, the system demands a brutal, violent deleveraging. When rates can't drop and the deficit can't be hidden, Dalio's economic heart attack isn't a risk. It's a certainty. Volcano number 2, the internal tear. 1936 saw the global explosion of populism and strongmen, fueled by a total loss of faith in democracy and capitalism after the Depression. Sound familiar? Today, the top 1% of Americans hoard 32% of the wealth. This extreme wealth gap breaks the power dynamic. When the masses realize the game is rigged, when they lose faith that the rules are fair, they stop looking for leaders. They start worshipping demolition men with sledgehammers and chainsaws. Volcano number 3, external chaos. Dalio places us firmly in stage 6 of the grand debt cycle. The war stage. Geopolitics isn't about negotiation anymore. It's naked, zero-sum power. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War was a proxy testing ground for World War II weaponry. In 2026, from Ukraine to the Middle East, from the scramble for resources in Greenland to the razor's edge in South America, every single flashpoint is stress testing a highly fragile global nerve. Historians have a specific word for the people of 1936, sleepwalkers. They sleepwalked right through the roaring prosperity, sleepwalked past the distant gunfire, until the storm made landfall in 1939 and pulverized everything. The real tragedy wasn't the storm itself. It was terrifying ignorance of being swept up in a historical flood and not even realizing your feet were wet. In 36, Hitler literally declared he was walking his path with the assurance of a sleepwalker. Meanwhile, fireworks lit up the Berlin Olympics. Jesse Owens ran to global applause. No one knew they were watching the final dying gasp of the old civilization. They thought the fighting belonged in the stadium, and war belonged in the margins of the newspaper. 90 years later, 2026, we're back in Munich. But the polite handshakes are gone. All we hear is the obituary for the old world. This isn't an era of patching things up. Everyone is holding a sledgehammer, desperate to smash the cage that kept us safe for 80 years. From 1936 to 1939, humanity ran out of luck in exactly 3 years. Here in 2026, we are still happily drowning in algorithms and AI dopamine hits. With alliance treaties shredding like paper, and the cozy Goldilocks era officially pronounced dead, do we really have another 3 years? Maybe this final stretch of quiet is just the world taking one last deep breath, while history sharpens its knife. Dalio warns that power is, ultimately, a hidden blade. When that blade is finally unsheathed, glinting in the final sunset of 2026, are you truly ready to wake up?